So a couple things before I dive into this. Number one, just because I used real-life footage for a Dennis Smith video does not mean every single video I do is going to have real-life footage for several different reasons. Number two, the Magic series is still a thing. It's just we're right in the middle of NBA stuff happening. The draft just happened, free agency is about to begin, and things like Chris Paul ending up on the Houston Rockets happened, so we kind of have to talk about it. Okay, so Chris Paul, who to me is the third best point guard in the NBA, behind Steph Curry and Russell Westbrook, which for some reason I have to say, is now a member of the Rockets, a team that already has a ball-dominant player in James Harden, and that's been kind of the entire discussion of this, is can these two coexist together? Because I think we would all agree that if Houston found an offensive system where these guys were able to play up to their full potential with each other, then that could be a pretty insane offensive team, and one that is not just great in terms of like offensive rating and all that, but also when it comes time for the playoffs and a team like San Antonio, for example, is game planning against you, then you have another thing to go to, because that was the problem with Houston, was once the Spurs just backed up on pick and rolls, dared them to shoot mid-range, and then didn't help off of shooters, the Rockets' high-powered offense was figured out. You have Chris Paul, another guy who can create other than James Harden, as well as play off the ball. You give yourself more versatility. Do I think it's going to be a perfect fit day one? No. Do I think the chances of them figuring it out are pretty high? Yeah, I'll say that. Because I think in the end, when you have two guys as talented as James Harden and Chris Paul are, and two guys who can shoot as well as they can, I think they can figure it out. I don't think either one of them are natural off-ball players, though. If we look at James Harden first, he's never going to kill anyone with his athleticism. He's super crafty and he's strong, and he's a great ball handler and all that, but when it comes to just like jetting past someone off of a screen or running around the floor the way a Steph Curry would, I'm not going to trust James Harden to be able to do that. I also don't trust him to have the stamina to consistently do that night after night. But I do think in stretches, Harden can be used off the ball, perhaps cutting to the rim at times with, receiving passes from Chris Paul and moving off of screens, but I don't think he's like going to be that great at it either. One thing I saw on Twitter was like, yeah, well, LeBron James and Dwayne Wade figured it out. The difference there is that Dwayne Wade and LeBron at that time, and I mean LeBron is still this, is they were incredible athletes. So Wade could cut to the rim and he'd be totally fine with that. I don't see James Harden being as successful as Dwayne Wade was off the ball, but I do think Harden has some things he can do. One thing I'm interested in is if Harden is ever going to screen for Chris Paul, because that could be pretty interesting. If you're forcing the defense to make a decision on who to defend, do they switch that, or do they try to play more conventional pick and roll defense? It'll be interesting to see what they do. Now, can Chris Paul play off ball? I'm not going to give him as much of a chance because, similar to Harden, he's not going to kill you with his athleticism, but he's also like around 6 feet tall. And he doesn't have the speed of an Isaiah Thomas. So I would give Harden more of a chance to be a successful player without the ball in his hands than I would Chris Paul. Now, CP3 and Harden can both stretch the floor, so they can at least be constantly providing spacing for the other guy. And I do think we're still going to see a lot of the Rockets' offense from this season, even with these two guys on the floor. Like, there are going to be times when Chris Paul just gets a screen from Clint Capella with a completely spread floor, and we'll just see what happens. And James Harden will be one of the guys chilling in the corner or whatever. And then the same thing, but vice versa. Harden will get the screen, and then Chris Paul will be one of the guys chilling off on the three-point line. But of course, I expect Mike D'Antoni, who's a very smart offensive coach, to have more dynamic things for these guys to do. But I 100% believe there's going to be some push and pull between these guys where even if they're winning games early on, it might not be the most seamless fit in the world. But I think by the end of the season, barring any injuries and stuff like that, I think they can be okay, and I think they can figure out something that could be really damn effective, Chris Paul and James Harden together. And that's just with them on the floor together. It should be said that one of these guys is going to be playing probably at all times. I would suspect that Mike D'Antoni will stagger their minutes, which means you're going to have someone who's one of the best offensive leaders in the game constantly on the floor. I mean, I would say Chris Paul is a top 10 player, and I'd say the same thing about James Harden, and both of these guys are great playmakers. So Houston's offense should pretty much never falter. In fact, if they're not the best offensive team in the league this upcoming year, I think that's enough to be disappointed, because I think the potential is that high with these two. And then, of course, Mike D'Antoni's offense. It's going to be cool to see like what Eric Gordon does, for example, because he's still on this team even if Lou Williams is not. I would assume that Gordon will be the first replacement for whoever exits the game first, whether that's Chris Paul or James Harden, I don't know. Probably Chris Paul, because you want his minutes to be a little bit more down at this point. So you can have Harden and Gordon out there for a, 7 or 8 minute stretch, and then you can bring Chris Paul back in, and then Eric Gordon's still good to go. So the backcourt is just going to be constantly killing opposing teams for Houston, and that's going to be really valuable. Now, do I still have some concerns? Yeah, of course. One of which is they traded away a decent amount of their role players. They got rid of Harrell, they got rid of Sam Decker, who was putting in some minutes for them. Patrick Beverley I'm not as upset about because, Chris Paul in return, you know. The one guy who they definitely need to bring back is Nene, because he was really good for them off the bench as a backup center, being someone who could just be kind of pretty okay on both sides of the floor. And if they bring him back, then losing Harrell isn't going to be as bad. But he's probably going to want some more money because he was good for you this season. The other position that I think they really need to find something at is they need a two-way wing. Trevor Ariza is cool, but I think you're going to need one more guy because I still don't like Ryan Anderson defensively at the power forward spot for you. I think the deeper you get into the playoffs, he's just going to be someone who the other team can constantly attack. So if you could have a wing who, I don't know who this wing player would be, to where your closing lineup is Chris Paul, James Harden, whoever the hell you get, Trevor Ariza at the power forward position, and then Clint Capella, I like that five quite a bit because you got shooters everywhere, besides Capella, of course, and then I would recommend guys for them to get, but I have no idea in hell what their salary actually looks like at the moment, so whatever opportunity they have to acquire some sort of a two-way wing player, they should definitely jump on it. Here's what I think. I think it's not going to be a seamless fit day one, but as the season goes along, they're going to figure out ways of Chris Paul and James Harden having their opportunities to kind of run things themselves, because of course they're both used to having the ball in their hands, but then acclimate the other guy into it through off-ball movements, setting screens, cutting to the basket. I trust Mike D'Antoni is going to figure this out, and I trust that these two could figure it out as well. And I think, honestly, from day one, you might actually see these guys be better when the other guy is not on the floor. But of course, as the season goes along, I just said everything I need to say. I like it a lot. I don't think the roster's complete just yet, but they're definitely going for it, man, and you got to appreciate that. Now, is there a possibility that this could just go horribly wrong and the fit just never works out and Chris Paul misses like 20 games? Honestly, I think the talent here is so damn high, as well as the shooting, that it might be a little disappointing. I think that's a possibility. I wouldn't bet on it, but I would definitely side on, I think this will go well.